Good morning. I am Shawn Brown, Board Chair of the Texas Women's Foundation. Thank you so much for being with us today for our final Leadership Forum virtual event for 2020. This series is presented by AT&T. These virtual events highlight the great work of our Maura and Young Leader Award recipients. For 42 years, the Maura Women Helping Women Award has recognized those who have led the way in improving lives for women and girls in Texas. The Maura Award is considered one of the most prestigious awards in the state of Texas. Maura Award recipients are recognized for their many years of dedicating time, leadership, and influence to advance opportunities for women and girls. These recipients are all sheroes in their own rights. The Texas Women's Foundation Young Leader Award recognizes breakthrough leadership exhibited by a Texan under the age of 40. These award recipients are achieving success in a field, initiative, or sector, and at the same time, creating a path of opportunity for others to follow. Nominations are now open for our 2021 Maura Women Helping Women Awards. If you know anyone from Texas who is doing great work for women and girls and should be nominated, we invite you to go to our website, www.txwf.org/events, to submit your nominations. And to be clear, we're accepting nominations for both the Maura Awards and the Young Leader Award. Nominations will be open through Friday, November 13th. Now, let's get to the business at hand. Today, we are presenting a meaningful conversation between two exceptional leaders, our Maura Women Helping Women awardee, Kathleen LaValle, and Laura Maxwell. Kathleen is president and CEO of Dallas CASA, where she makes a profound difference in so many children's lives each and every day. And Laura is senior vice president supply chain at Frito-Lay North America. She is also a member of the Texas Women's Foundation Board of Directors and co-chair of our Economic Leadership Council, where she and other C-suite leaders are driving for inclusivity in the workplace. Ladies, let the conversation begin.
Oh, I am so honored to be a part of these amazing awards. And as Shawn said, I serve on the board, and along with Frito-Lay, we are so proud to be a part of the foundation and all that they do for women and families, both here locally and all across Texas. And it's that work with the foundation that has also allowed me the chance to do something very special today, and that is spend time with our Maura awardee, Kathleen LaValle. So let me tell you just a little bit about Kathleen. Kathleen LaValle practiced law for 3 decades, earning distinction in Chambers USA as a top-tier practitioner and chairing the Texas State Bar Antitrust and Business Litigation section. For the last 6 years, she has been the CEO of Dallas CASA, which now serves more children than any of the more than 900 CASA programs nationwide. Last year, Dallas CASA and its 1,500 volunteers were assigned to more than 3,600 child victims living in foster care. Prior to her current role, Kathleen was a Dallas CASA board member for 12 years, including a term as board chair. Kathleen also serves today as vice chair of the Dallas County Child Welfare Board. Now, while a partner with Jackson Walker, Kathleen headed the firm's Women's Initiative and served on the Diversity Steering Committee. In 2014, the Texas Law Book recognized Jackson Walker for successful years promoting more women to partnership than any other law firm in Texas. Kathleen was recognized as an SMU Dedman School of Law Distinguished Alumni in 2018, and she received the Regional Chambers Athena Award in 2014. So it is very obvious to me why she is a Maura awardee. So welcome to Kathleen. Hi, Kathleen.
Hey, Laura, how are you?
Just great. So great to see you. Okay, so before we get started with the questions that I have for you, Kathleen, I want to let our viewers know that following the conversation between the two of us, we welcome you to ask questions as well. I'm going to ask a few, then you get to ask a few. So what you'll be able to do is click on the Q&A icon that you see below, and then we'll be happy to answer your questions afterwards. Okay, Kathleen, ready to get started?
I'm so ready. This is such
Okay.
an honor, Laura.
Wonderful. So first, what compelled you to be an advocate for other women?
Well, I think we're all motivated when we see what a profound difference it makes when women help other women. So I think that really is the overall motivation. When I was asked to launch the Women's Initiative at Jackson Walker, though, there were some dynamics in play that created an urgency around retaining and promoting talented women. And I'll just speak to two of those. First of all, we were seeing, not just at the firm, but across the profession, we're seeing very talented women opt out of the legal profession because of what they saw as an incompatibility with raising a family. And, it's a very, very, as you and I know, very personal decision about how to fulfill our personal goals and our professional goals. But what we wanted to make sure of was that women were not self-selecting out of the practice because of barriers that we as a firm could lower. So that was really the priority. At the same time, we were aware of an opportunity, I call it the All Boats Rise opportunity, where we were seeing that frequently talented women such as yourself were the ones who were actually making the purchasing decisions. They were the purveyors and buyers of professional services, and what an opportunity that creates, right? Where you could gain a reputation as a firm that recognized and promoted women, and that could actually be a benefit to the entire enterprise. So that was an opportunity we had to really show that diversity, equity, inclusion had a firm-wide, created a firm-wide advantage.
No, that's awesome. I have to say, you absolutely are an advocate for women and families, and I love the all boats rise kind of reference. That's awesome. All right. So, you've obviously done a lot of things and you've seen a lot of things. So what are the unique challenges for women in professional services or a law firm? And how have you seen those change over time?
Well, I think the best way to describe it, as having been a commercial litigator, either before a judge or a jury or even clients, what I was aware of was that the scorecard for women, it simply had more categories and more subcategories. And I think the women listening today will kind of resonate with that idea that there are just more ways in which we could be judged or critiqued. And kind of a banal example, if one of our male colleagues wore the same suit 3 out of 5 days last week, I doubt any of us would have noticed. But unless you're Rachel Maddow, a woman who's trying to rotate through a severely limited wardrobe, it's perhaps going to be noticed. And on a more serious side, just an expression of strength by a woman is just received differently than a forceful statement by our male colleagues. And so we continue to be graded differently in certain categories. I certainly witnessed tremendous advances over 3 decades. But the reality is there are still serious challenges. And some of those, Laura, are actually being emphasized during the pandemic that we're struggling through. I was just astonished to see the statistics that came out last week that, 865,000 women exited the workforce last month. That was 4 times the number of men who exited. And we know that's because of, important commitments being made to full-time childcare and education. So that, we see our women pulled in so many different directions. And I think that's why we really need to be aware of that. And it's important that we continue to look for ways to support women as they are making those critical decisions about how to raise a family and continue in their professional life. One of the key policy changes that Jackson Walker made while I was a partner there was a decision to eliminate a requirement that an attorney who was on an alternative work schedule, had reduced hour expectations. There had been a requirement that you come off of that status and be full-time before you could be considered eligible for partnership. And the firm not only eliminated that requirement, but then actually immediately promoted women as partner. And because it's important that we not just make policy changes, but that we witness those being implemented and making a real difference. And so that, that was just one example of a policy change that had an immediate impact. And actually, as you noted in the introduction, and the media recognized Jackson Walker as having promoted more women to partnership by far over the number of years they studied than any other Texas law firm. So the gain was in reputation. And that was, really, I think that was driven largely by that single policy change.
I couldn't agree with you more. And it's so interesting, the challenges. We've made a lot of progress, but to your point this year, and I've learned a lot, even just, being a member of the board and the foundation, at all the statistics that have affected women uniquely this year, but based on everything going on. So, I'm glad we're having the conversation. So now let's move to career a little bit, because I think that for people that heard your bio, they have the same question I do, which is, what prompted you to transition from a career of practicing law to leading a child advocacy organization?
So I like to share that, one of my friends, when he heard that I was applying for the position at Dallas CASA, called it the day that I fell and hit my head. And he wondered, what are you going to do when you wake up and realize what you've done? And so I can tell you that I'm fully conscious. I am totally awake to this experience, and I could not just be more, profoundly grateful for having made this change, essentially repurposing my career at that stage. And I think it's important to share that, I wasn't running from the law. I actually love practicing law. But it was one of those now or never kind of moments. The prior head of Dallas CASA had been in that role for 21 years and was gracious enough to give us a 1-year notice that she was planning to retire. And I was actually part of the board selection committee working with Korn Ferry. And, I found that the further I got into that process, I can't really describe how it happened, but I began to see myself in that role. And one of the reasons I was able to do that was because of the tremendous support I had from my family, who really were pushing me to go through that discernment process. And so it's hard for me to kind of reconstruct how I got there, but I'm just thrilled that I did. The irony, Laura, I'll share with you, is just that when we were working on the job description for the position, there was a discussion about should prior nonprofit management experience be a prerequisite, or should it be nice but not required? And I was on the fence about that. I personally had no nonprofit management experience other than serving on the board. So it is, looking back, kind of ironic. And I'm the beneficiary of the committee before I stepped off the committee, having made the decision not to require prior nonprofit management as a prerequisite.
That is honestly very interesting, and I could see that. I would tell you, as I've gotten to know you, your passion for both, your passion for law, your passion for Dallas CASA just clearly shines through, your passion for family. But let's talk a bit about Dallas CASA. What about the mission drew you to the organization and continues to inspire you today?
Well, the mission and the model pretty much had me from hello. I just was so drawn to the idea that when you're advocating for children, it's not just the impact that you're making in the life of a single child, but you really are investing in the future of our community. I believe that, so strongly. The other thing about the CASA model is, when you think about it, Laura, it's really very radical. You're taking trained volunteers and you're putting them on the front line of service. And, I think of it as it's a step beyond your typical public-private partnership between a nonprofit and a court-administered or a county-administered court system. You're really adding another dimension. And so it's really a public-private personal partnership. We actually have individuals coming in off the sidelines who are outraged by what they see in the media and with their concern for children, and they're bringing with them our community values. They're bringing their expectations of how we think our children should be protected, how we think our children's needs should be met, and how we think our families should be supported. And that model is so compelling for me. And if it is for you, DallasCasa.org, learn how you can become a volunteer advocate. Had to get that in, Laura.
No, you have to get, in fact, I mean, honestly, I'll say this very sincerely. So over the years, since I've lived in this area, I will meet people that are either current volunteers or past volunteers. And regardless, their passion, their commitment, what they've learned through the training, their advocacy, it clearly shines through. So, I mean, obviously, you and your team are doing just an amazing job for, children and families in our communities. So it's awesome. Now, so you talk about board membership, and you've had both nonprofit and for-profit, and I serve on the board, and I always I remember not really knowing anything about board service. So I know that we have supporters out there who are interested in nonprofit board service. So what was it like to go from being an elected board member to reporting to a board now? And what advice do you have for women who are new to board service?
That first question is probably better answered by the 42 extraordinary and highly engaged members of our board of directors that I'm just so honored to work with day in and day out. It's the best set of bosses a nonprofit CEO could ever hope for. I do think from a personal perspective, what that experience of transitioning has been like, it's just been a super rewarding partnership that I think is based on a lot of mutual trust. And I think the fact that I previously served as a board member really has created that platform of mutual trust that allows me to take some risks and face some challenges that if I didn't have that prior history, it might have been more difficult for me to do, if that makes sense. The question of how to get involved in board service and what to do as a newer board member, I think honestly the easiest path onto a board, once you've identified what's the sector that I'm passionate about, is it the arts, is it medicine, is it education, is it social services, is it a foundation? Once you've kind of gone through that process, is if you have the advantage of knowing someone who's on the board and even someone who's about to term out, about to leave that board membership, the easiest path on is to be recommended by an existing board member. And so that's a fortunate circumstance if you're in that position. In terms of how to really make an impact, I think it's important as a newer board member to really focus strongly on your committee engagement, being involved in that smaller group where you can be part of deliberations and actions and kind of practice so that you have more confidence to bring your voice to the deliberations of the entire board.
That is tremendous advice. That's great. So, you mentioned 2020. We talked about women in 2020, and I think about all that this year, has brought to us. And I read and saw in your bio that you served on Jackson Walker's Diversity Steering Committee. You were also a panelist for the Courageous Conversations event the Dallas Mavericks hosted following the death of George Floyd. What issues of racial justice do you encounter in the child welfare system?
We have an oversized issue of disproportionality in the child welfare system. Just one statistic I'll share with you. Black children make up 21% of the child population of Dallas County. It's about 1 out of 5. And yet they represent 48%, nearly half of the children who are removed from home because of reports of child abuse or neglect. And whenever we see that kind of disparity, you know, of really staggering, and Dallas, honestly, is better than many of our large urban areas. But that gap is just so stunning. And when you see that, you really have to look at the front door of a system, right? And so, what we find is that a Black child is just significantly more likely to be the subject of a child abuse report than a white child. And that is particularly the case when the reporter is law enforcement. It's not as out of balance when it's educators or even medical personnel, but it is definitely distinct. 40% of the reports that law enforcement makes of child abuse, a Black child is the subject of the report.
So I think, Kathleen, we have time for a couple more questions, but let's stay with this a bit. What advice do you have for women who want to help us make progress toward racial and ethnic equity?
Well, it's a great time to be asking that question, right, Laura? I mean, there's just so many important conversations going on. And my advice is to listen and learn. And while you're on that path of education, to really walk with humility and courage. The humility part is to recognize that people who look like me, cannot inhabit the lived experiences of persons of color, and just to recognize that, and to recognize that I can't begin to really fully appreciate the impact of bias, implicit and explicit, in someone's life. And so I think that's the humility part. The courage part is to be willing to engage in conversations that might be uncomfortable. We at Dallas CASA, we will select books and documentaries. Two of my favorite selections were Between the World and Me, and more recently we watched the documentary 13th, and then we got together and had small group discussions. And those are so powerful, to be able to engage in discussions where you admit your lack of experience, sure. Your lack of knowledge, and just put it out there. There's another initiative that's been ongoing for a couple of years, Project Unity, and I highly encourage anyone who has the opportunity to participate in one of their events to seize that moment. They facilitate with trained facilitators small group discussions. Again, you get to explore questions like, well, what are my perceptions of racial division? How are they different than my parents or my grandparents? And we really begin to explore, what about our background informs, our decisions today and our impressions. And so my hope is that we'll all participate in more of those facilitated discussions so that we become less reticent to talk about race, because I think it's in those open dialogues that we really, we gain insight.
That's wonderful. Honestly, wonderful suggestions, wonderful advice, and very timely to your point. So we'll bring it on with one more. Kathleen, what impact do you believe Texas Women's Foundation has on the lives of women and girls? And how have you seen the foundation lift up women's leadership and ensure opportunities for all women to succeed?
I think as a community, we just have to be so proud that the Texas Women's Foundation operates out of Dallas and has really, though, a statewide, in some cases worldwide impact. And so just so proud to have any affiliation with the Texas Women's Foundation. I think we can all talk about the great works and the powerful initiatives the foundation has launched and supported. But I really want to start by just recognizing the real value of this organization is in the talent it attracts, starting with Ross, the CEO, and her dedicated team, and then Laura, leaders like you and Sean, who are drawn to board involvement with this tremendous organization. I think that first and foremost, it creates opportunities and draws resources to girls and women. And we know that when you improve the lives of women, the lives of families are improved. And then it also, beyond that, I think the foundation helps us recognize as women how powerful our collective actions are, our collective commitment to getting the work done, to bringing resources to bear to make really radical differences in the lives of girls and women.
Listen, I have to tell you that Kathleen, through this whole process that kind of led to this morning, and then very clearly, and I'm sure that our audience feels the same, it is so clear to me why you were a Maura awardee. It has been absolutely delightful to spend time with you and to hear your wisdom and your experience. So thank you so much for the conversation. I think now I am handing it back over to Sean, and we'll do some Q&A.
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Laura, for leading that conversation, and Laura, for your continued advocacy on behalf of women and girls in not only your service on our board, but in leading the Economic Leadership Council. And Kathleen, time and this insightful conversation is just so wonderful. I have to take a point of personal privilege because it's my pleasure, but I also just personally, I know I have benefited from the work that you have done. When you talk about that scorecard for women in the profession, and particularly women lawyers in law firms, I'm just so appreciative of the work that you led and have done to advance the experience for women lawyers so that we continue to have meaningful careers, but also can ourselves just work to help make it easier for the women who also follow us. And then if that wasn't enough, then you go on to make an extreme impact in the nonprofit space through Dallas CASA. And so you have just knocked it out of the park in so many different avenues, and we're so grateful for the conversation. We do have a couple of questions since I'm just gushing, and my real job is to ask these questions. And so the first one is kind of along those lines. They say, the question is, I'm so impressed with your, quote, second career. What advice do you have for us who are of a certain age, in quotes, who want to transition to another career?
Okay, my response to this question, Sean, is always frustrating. Okay, I'm just going to own it right up front. And that is because, again, I was not actually looking to make a transition. And I certainly was not exploring different nonprofits and looking for a path forward. And so I think it's about becoming passionate in a particular area and seeing what opportunities unfold. I do believe there's just a part of that is kind of beyond our individual effort, and that you just have to be fortunate enough to have the opportunities out there, but also to seize them when they present themselves. I was kind of sad. I've had several women colleagues and friends who said that they were interested actually in applying for the CEO job at Dallas CASA, and they didn't have their family support. And that made me very sad, because I not only had my family support, they were pushing me. My son was a little bit concerned about it. He said, well, you have to read all of the files, because he's seen me openly weep during reruns of Little House on the Prairie. So he had that concern, but that made a tremendous difference in my ability to seize that opportunity.
Yeah. And I think, one of the words you used when you were talking about advice in terms of, racial justice was, you said listen and learn, but then you also said humility, which you bear a lot of, and courage, right? And so you also didn't just seize it, but you had the courage to take the opportunity and step out into a different direction. So that question sort of leads to another one that has come up, and you talked about weeping during episodes of Little House on the Prairie, and folks want to know what the most difficult part of your job as CEO and president of Dallas CASA is.
Well, because it's so much on my mind, I have to speak to, the current difficulty. I cannot tell you what it's like to try and protect the safety of a child from a safe distance. It's just extremely frustrating. And so we have had to become very, very strategic and creative in our ways to really have a meaningful contact and connection with children and their caretakers during this time. We do allow in-person visits, but I have a protocol. We like those to be outside, physical distance, masks. Sometimes we have to make exceptions. We had a 2-year-old who was in the ICU, just beaten so badly they had to remove part of his skull because his brain was swelling. And we had a volunteer who went in every single day and sat with that 2-year-old. And he moved on to rehabilitation. He's now in a therapeutic foster home and just thriving. But it took that volunteer who actually, she's a manager for a hotel. She actually moved into the hotel to be able to expose herself to the risk of going into a hospital every day. She didn't want to bring those health concerns home to her family. So she actually, relocated into that hotel. What a sacrifice, but she'll tell you it's the most rewarding experience she's had.
Yeah, that's, I appreciate that the pandemic is having an impact in every aspect of our lives, but I know that a lot of that, the interaction between the CASAs and the children who are suffering, that physical touch is extremely important. A hug, a touch on the shoulder, a stroke of the hair. And so I'd imagine you guys have had to come up with some really creative ways to still create that connection and bond, while also, living into these current circumstances. Are there other creative ways that maybe you guys have thought about how to continue those interactions?
Yes, so I have to do a shout out to someone in our profession, in the legal profession, Sean, Cliff Hutchinson, who is retired from practicing law. He and I were actually opposing counsel in some of the more significant telecommunications regulatory dockets that I was involved in my career. And he's now a CASA volunteer, and he does a 1-hour science lesson every week with the 10-year-old that he's currently assigned to, who this kid is so smart. And so he just whips through his schoolwork, right? And so Cliff found a way to engage him. And, I think the first week's assignment was, different kinds of beetles, and he's done dinosaurs, and he constructs this hour-long science lesson that the child, he's suffered trauma. There are behaviors that go along with having suffered trauma. He ended up having to move placements to another foster home. And his burning question was, does Mr. Cliff come with me?
Oh.
And, and Mr. Cliff definitely comes with him.
Yeah. Wow. That's amazing. And what a beautiful connection. So, part of obviously what you do is all about the people who have given their time and have, signed up to make sure that they can make a difference. Another question that is in the chat, it talks about collaboration. And so clearly the work that you all do requires you to work with a lot of other groups like the police and other organizations. And so the question is if you can describe some of those partnerships and collaborations that you all have.
I think particularly in the child welfare sector, Sean, it's just so important that, we all play well in the sandbox. And that's a principle that we try to be a leader in that effort to be collaborative. Probably the most distinct area where that is recognized is in our advocacy for high-risk teens and for teens who have been sexually exploited. So we have a child who's been trafficked, and you are so much more at risk of being a victim of trafficking if you've been part of the foster care system, the statistics are just staggering. And so we have to recognize that. We have implemented a curriculum that's specific to CASA volunteers to help you recognize when a child's been victimized, help you recognize a predator, and how to effectively advocate for these children. And in that effort, we're working very closely with law enforcement. A fabulous group of detectives that are assigned specifically to high-risk children. We work very closely with child advocacy centers. We work very closely with groups that are advocates for survivors. And so that's probably the best example. But we honestly collaborate in every area, particularly with groups like Text Protects and Family Compass. We're very focused on child prevention. Sometimes you think about CASA and you think, what does that have to do with child abuse prevention as opposed to advocacy for children who already have been recognized as victims? But we are very much about trying to contribute to systemic changes that make it less likely that a child ever has to be removed from home, because I mean, that itself is traumatic.
Yeah.
And if you've studied the lawsuit, the class action involving children who've been in long-term foster care, we've got a federal judge who said that children exit in worse condition than when they entered. And so it has to be a priority of our community that we support families, that we are, very, very focused on child abuse prevention. And that's where those collaborative efforts with those other agencies and with Child Protective Services, we're staunchly independent and have our own views and bring our own opinions to the core processes. But our alliances with leadership at Child Protective Services are really very strong. And that's where sitting on the Child Welfare Board gives us an opportunity to really bring the community together and to focus on the needs of our children and families.
Yeah. Wow, that's so vast, and I love the time that you spend on the preventive side too, because it's not just addressing the trauma, but really getting ahead of that. So another question that has popped up related to that, and another question about the difficulty of your job, during this time where we would normally all be together and congratulating you in person and clinking glasses, where we had interaction and the opportunity just for our mental health of seeing and being with each other. What have you been able to do? We all talked about your bright, beautiful yellow suit that you're wearing. What do you do when it gets to be heavy and you need a mental timeout or a break just to continue to keep yourself lifted up so that you can continue advancing in this fight for change?
Well, I have a built-in advantage. Some of you know that my husband is a longtime licensed psychologist. So having a
that's good.
having a therapist in your house, I gotta say, it's very helpful. And then a huge shout out to my 6-year-old golden doodle Bailey, who honestly keeps all of us sane. Our morning walks. I mean, we are walking more frequently and longer than I ever have the opportunity to when I'm rushing to get to a 7:30 a.m. breakfast. And so that's probably been the biggest change, is that we're outside a lot more. And that, I think we all know what a positive benefit that delivers for our mental health.
Yeah, that's true. And luckily we've had good weather to be able to do that as well.
Yes.
So, well, hopefully I will see you on the trail soon. Kathleen, this has just been so wonderful, and it's been our honor to be able to recognize you for work that is not really work for you, but it's passion, and the advances that you have made and will continue to make. We have loved learning about more about what you do, and look forward to being able to just continue to help as you continue to advance and change lives, not only for those children and families who are impacted by abuse, but for our entire community as you educate us so that we can also help be part of the solution. So thank you so very much for this time.
Thank you so much, Sean and Laura. Wow, what a pleasure. Laura didn't reveal yet that my very first job out of college was at Frito-Lay. So we have that amazing connection. I think I gained 15 pounds in the first month.
We
Things
made that
definitely
connection.
go full circle. I love that.
I just think this is the most wonderful way to start a day, to get to hear from just brilliant, wonderful people like our Maura Award recipient, Kathleen LaValle, and our great leader and friend, Laura Maxwell and Sean Brown. I'm really so grateful to all of you who joined us today, and I'm in a way I'm sad, but I'm uplifted, but sad that this is our last of the virtual Leadership Forum events. The 6 events each have been very unique and very special in their own right, and you can go on our website and catch the highlights or the full videos of each. This has been a rich and wonderful experience, and I'm so grateful to all of you who've been part of it with us.